Good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Ogden. I'm an editor with Lpac TV. You're joining us for our regular Friday night live broadcast over this website featuring Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. Today is December 7th, and of course, on this day we observe a solemn anniversary. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, bringing the United States into the Second World War. Now, I know Mr. LaRouche has a very important message to deliver tonight. Quickly, before we begin, the format will be the same as what we've followed before. After Mr. LaRouche's opening remarks, we will have a discussion period. Joining us today in the studio are Jason Ross and also Dennis Mason, who is an editor, a fellow editor with Lpac TV. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. So without further introduction, I give you Mr. Lyndon LaRouche.
Well, what I'm going to say today will cause a certain amount of difficulty in the audience unless we pay close attention to some concepts which are not commonly recognized, but which are actually crucial in this particular situation. Now, the principal subject today we're launching on this event is we are taking the three conditions which are required to prevent the United States from going bankrupt. First of all is Glass-Steagall. But Glass-Steagall alone by itself cannot do anything miraculous in terms of changing things. But it's necessary to protect the banking system, that is the honest banking system, and prevent that from being corrupted by the kind of speculation which is being done now, for example, in terms of everything that the federal government is doing, which is wrong. And unless those things are changed, we're in trouble. Okay, so Glass-Steagall is the actually indispensable action without which the United States economy is not going to survive. And by non-surviving, I mean something relatively immediate. The whole system is now going into the breaking point of hectic irrationality, in which it goes, everything becomes chaotic. And this is the bailout point, which corresponds to what happened to Germany in 1923, in October approximately of 1923, where everything went bankrupt. That's where we are. Now, but however, as I say, Glass-Steagall is indispensable, but it does not contain a cure. It contains a preventive of gambling. But it nonetheless is necessary. But here's where the problem comes in. We're going to be operating on the basis not of the present system. That is, if the United States is going to survive, if the U.S. economy is not going to disintegrate entirely, what's going to have to happen relatively immediately now is the installation of a credit system as the basis for actually creating the potential growth of the U.S. economy that is an inflation-free form of growth, or hyperinflation-free form of growth, as the matter is now. Now, most people don't understand that because they think of this. They think of that money placed in a bank, or the denomination of money placed in a bank or some other kind of institution, represents credit, the basis for credit. It does not. Does not. A credit system is based on the growth of per capita wealth per person in society, or household for society. And that's very poorly understood, because the assumption that's made by all the people who are incompetent ever since they were swallowed by something happened years ago, decades ago, is they assume that money deposited in a bank or attributed to be posed in a bank represents value. It does not. Money is a very tricky thing, money as such, because it has no intrinsic means of defending itself against hyperinflation or simple other kinds of problem. So only a certain credit system is the key to this process. Now, what happens is that we have now three categories we're considering. First of all, Glass-Steagall. That is an absolute. Glass-Steagall must be imposed as the original Glass-Steagall form. The Franklin Roosevelt Glass-Steagall is what must be done. Anything different than that should get somebody shot, because things are getting that bad these days. The credit system, what do we mean by a credit system? That the federal government organizes a system under which credit is uttered, and the anticipation is that is a time factor, that if we assign a certain value to something as credit, we must assume that by the time that credit has been collected or realized, that there will be growth in the value of the product and growth in the value of the credit itself. This can be interpreted various ways. It means that things become cheaper, and therefore you have a gain, which is margin for profit, because things became cheaper through productivity, for example, is that kind of method. But in the case, but otherwise, there is no other source value in terms of money as such, merely as circulated, as is being done now with this hyperinflationary process, which is about to destroy the United States. That cannot be tolerated. So therefore, the value lies in what? It lies in physical values per capita. Now, this also includes the increase of the value of work, the value of production. Because what happens as we become more efficient, we tend to go into higher technologies. These are more productive, and therefore we have a difference between the point that the credit is issued first and the time that it's matured, when the payoff has to come. So the assumption is that an increase in productivity in two ways, either in terms of the absolute productivity, or the combination of an increase in productivity and also an decrease in the relative cost of the same item. We become more efficient, we can produce the same thing more cheaply. That's another source. But the point is that the key thing to the whole system is that you must realize that there must be an increase in the physical productive powers of labor, as expressed in terms of net production, that must occur. And that's the basis of the credit system. That's where the question of determination of value lies. In other words, if you want a stable system, you've got to have growth, physical growth, or improvement in the efficiency of physical growth. So therefore, what you have is, by advancing credit, as if you were loaning money, that this money must increase in value. Well, the money doesn't actually increase in value. What increases in value, the cost of the product decreases in value, in terms of relative value. And that's the basis of credit. Credit does not lie in letting money sit in a bank. It must do something. It must change its character. It must be more efficient, or it must be more enriching. It means technological progress. It means higher rates of energy flux density, which is an essential part of this. People are more skilled. They do a job which is a more skilled job. They produce more value with the same amount of nominal labor. That's the system. We must generate growth. We must increase the productive powers of labor. We must advance technology. Absolutely. We must increase the energy flux density of the system flowing through the entire system. So all the myths which Republicans and Democrats alike believe in with a kind of religious, or should we say satanic, passion is wrong. The generation of credit as real credit occurs only by the increase of the productive powers of labor as measured in physical terms. This means the physical terms in the sense that people who are doing the same thing do it more efficiently, or do it at higher technology, with greater, for example, the increase of energy flux density in terms of higher density of power per capita. All these factors are factors which can lead to the creation of credit potential, on which real credit is based. So the basic reform, first of all, is that the generation of credit is associated with the credit system, not with the simple Glass-Steagall system as such. Therefore, the Glass-Steagall system function is to give us a fixed reference point for which to make the comparisons on which growth is determined. And that is something which is not understood except for a rare few individuals in both sides of the Atlantic. And that's what the problem is. So therefore, the credit system as such, what does that mean? It means that the federal government organizes transactions in society such that the credit is being generated. In other words, if you are increasing productivity by higher productivity, by new technologies, you're increasing the value of production. You're increasing the value of labor. And it's that growth in value associated with improvements in improvements in employment. For example, when we employ people for doing nothing, which is what we tend to do these days, if we employ people at all, we're not really increasing credit. We're increasing hyperinflation. In this case today. So now, but the typical Republican of these times believes that the money sitting in the bank or sitting in someone's account, sitting there, is just sitting there waiting to grow. And that's what they find out is they end up with inflation, but not an increase in actual value. And that is the actual, and there's no real increase in credit. Because a credit system, as the United States, well, let's take the case of a nice hard one. Let's go back to the middle of the period of the settlement of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Then we had a system of credit which was set up in that colony, that you would take a commitment to complete something, which would be an increase in technology. Then you would find that improvement in technology had increased the value of the credit which had been established to go outgoing. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony, during this heyday of its growth, was actually the fastest growing nation in the world in terms of technology and in terms of its economic measurement. And only after the Massachusetts Bay Colony was crushed by the British interests, then it went back into a poorer condition. Then the same thing was started in Pennsylvania after Massachusetts had been pretty much crushed. And in Pennsylvania, with the influence of Benjamin Franklin, a number of things were done based on the concept of paper credit, paper money. Because the paper money represented credit, but the credit did not lie in the money as such. It lay in the fact of the improvement in the productive powers of labor, either through just the improvement of skill as such, the improvement of working on the basis of a productive product as opposed to a useless product, and so forth. So it was actually a physical value in all cases, was to increase the productivity of labor relative to an earlier point in time. And some averaging of the whole process of the productive circulation process was to do that. We're now in a hyperinflationary system, and it's about to crash. We're about to have the highest rate of inflation the United States has probably ever existed as the United States, ever been through. And the problem is that people, including the Republican Party leaders, who are supposed to be hard-boiled, rational people, they're actually nuts. Their conception of the way the money system works is absolutely loony. The only thing that's more loony is the Democrats. So, which means we do have a few improvements to make in our product. Now, I mentioned these things so far. I've emphasized credit, the credit system. And the credit system has been the basis for every successful period of growth in terms of the United States from its beginning, from before its beginning, from the Massachusetts Bay Colony in its heyday. So credit is the difference between the productivity of labor per capita now and what it will be in improvements over some point in time. So it's the ratio of the improvement in potential, physical potential, represented by advances in technology or improvement in the rate of technology per capita of the population. And that's the basis. Now, we have another aspect of this thing. The credit system as such works in terms of the money system. But the money system only works when it's treated as a credit system. Then it works. But now we have, assuming, knowing that we get nothing out of Glass-Steagall in terms of gain. We don't get anything out of that as such, except to the degree we generate more credit, the realization of more credit. But in the case of the United States, we are so bankrupt as a result of what has happened, particularly since 2007, but actually earlier, much earlier. But the worst period now has been through 2007, where the takeoff occurred, leading into 2008, which led to the bailout money. So since that time, since 2007, 2008, the United States has been on the road to an increasing rate of bankruptcy. And the result of that is a corresponding increasing rate of hyperinflation. So therefore, what we have to do is we have a lot of labor we can't employ right now under present conditions. The banking system does not have the capital to bring this labor or the production into being as such. So therefore, we have to find some projects which we're going to give credit to from the federal government. Now, new federal credit is going to be supplied to these projects. These projects will employ some millions, actually, of people. One would be NWAPA. NWAPA is essential not only because it does generate a lot of true value and growth. It changes the character of the water system of the United States. It improves the productive power of labor in every way you can imagine. And we're talking about 6 million jobs right off the hand. They may not be too efficient at first. We have a few old hands who are now near retirement or into retirement, actually, who are capable of organizing labor employed for this purpose in order to get the thing rolling, to get this process of growth rolling. So the NWAPA, that's a big one. Then we also have another category. You know what happened some years ago? We shut down the auto industry, essentially, inside the United States. Now, at that point, I was in the middle of this process on policy. It was obvious to me, and we were boosting that at the time. Ford and some of the other industries were aware of this thing. What we had to do was go to what we did in World War II. In World War II, the automobile industry, as it became known, was the make-everything industry. Airplanes, submarines, torpedoes, anything you wanted to mention was made by the automobile industry. And you had the greatest amount of working space for this kind of production was under the heading of the auto industry. So the auto industry during this period of World War II was the make-everything industry. And it became that as a part of the build-up for fighting the war. At the end of the war, we had this great potential. But what had happened is you had a terrible president, Harry Truman, or whatever you want to call him. And this creep destroyed pretty much everything. He got so disgusting that the citizens of the United States became disgusted with him, and they decided to dump him. Right? So we had a real president then, after getting rid of this bum. But still, it was not. There was a lot there, but the auto industry of the 1950s became insane, totally insane. And I was an expert sitting in the middle of this and forecasting where this thing was going to go. And I had a early date in that period, in which I said it was going to collapse, and it did. The auto industry and several other industries went into a sudden collapse exactly on the day I forecasted would happen. Well, it was easy for me to forecast because this involved a lot of contracts, and therefore if you know something's going to crash, and you have the number of contracts and the location of the contracts which are subject to this crash, then you can do a pretty good job of forecasting. But I specialize in the future. It's more interesting than the president of the past. Even sometimes it's worse, but sometimes it's a better experience. So therefore, the development of the machine tool driver, what we lack is an expansion of the general category of a machine tool driver. And with that, which is as a supplement to or complement to what NWAPA will do as a project, means that we can immediately move into, and I say immediately move into, an end to this chaos and this insanity of the U.S. economy now. And we can move into a gradual but accelerating rate of recovery of the U.S. physical economy. Therefore, we can generate the credit on the basis of that recovery. That credit will enable us to rebuild the U.S. economy. But we have to earn our way by physical increments of real value. And that's the solution we need desperately. Now, we have a real problem in agriculture. We have deliberately, intentionally destroyed much of the U.S. agriculture. In one part, this destruction of the U.S. economy, its agricultural sector, is a failure to respond to challenges in certain parts of the country. On the other part, it's actually a deliberate process of mass murder of the population. Let me explain. The mass murder of the U.S. population, which is now in progress, is a product of the British Empire. And it's a product of the Queen herself. Because the Queen herself has adopted as her responsibility, or her culpability, I guess better said, in which she's saying we've got to reduce the population of the planet. We've got to increase the death rates of people. We've got to reduce the world's population from an estimated 7 billion people now rapidly to slightly more than 1 billion. And that's the genocide program. The Green program is a genocide program. The Green program means don't do anything that's going to increase productivity. Now that's a sure recipe for one of two things, either hyperinflation or mass murder, one of the two. And that's the policy of Obama. It's mass murder and hyperinflation, both. And that's going to become evident in a few weeks, if not next week. But in this immediate period, going into the next year, next calendar year, we're headed for this kind of crisis, a hyperinflationary crisis. Now, people are denying it from the press circles and so forth, the usual gossip circles, but everyone at the same time knows it. We're also headed for the threat of a thermonuclear war. And everyone who's in the military department really knows what's going on in that department, among nations, knows we're headed for a thermonuclear war unless we change our policies. And the combination of the Green policy, which is a mass murder policy, together with this threat of thermonuclear war, which is now coming down upon us, means a general threat to the human species as a whole. You're talking, as the Queen is talking, about a rapid reduction of the world's population, and mass murder is now occurring. It's accelerated greatly under Obama already. What the policies of Obama are actually policies of mass murder against the population. The canceling of health care, the eliminates the whole categories of health care, and the acceleration of the death rate by withholding medical facilities, withholding technology, withholding all kinds of defense against health problems. So that's where we are now. So we have also something else to consider. It's a very practical problem, which only a few people are paying attention to much now. And that is Mars. Now, the Mars is very important in this process, despite what some people don't know, is that the solar system, which we're a part, is not a fixed system in a fixed position doing the same old from year to year to year. The solar system itself has a limit to its calculated existence. Within 2 billion years, the sun will go away. That's the general estimate of the trend right now. And when the sun goes away, the brightness is going to go out of the universe for people. So therefore, we have to have a long-term consideration of what is happening. We're now getting an increase in the danger to mankind on Earth and elsewhere from asteroids and comets, which are becoming an increasing menace to the continued existence of mankind within the range, say, from the Mars orbit down to the Venus orbit. And this has been worked on for some time by some geniuses of the past who have understood the need to organize a defense of humanity on Earth in particular against these kinds of dangers, these kinds of threats. And therefore, it's important for us, for this reason and related reasons, that we look at the Mars project as we've defined it, as a defense of Earth project. That is, we are limited in our capability at present, even to locate the asteroid which may kill you in the morning. That's the situation. Now, obviously, we can do things about this, but it means a technological acceleration in that direction. And therefore, we have to say that mankind is no longer limited as a matter of policy to Earth itself. Because in order to defend Earth from mass killings on Earth, which are in the table, we don't know when they're going to hit in each case, because we only have a very small fraction of the known objects out there. Only a small fraction are actually known to us, identifiable to us today. It's a tiny fraction. And therefore we have a major effort to build up a system of detection and defense for mankind, operating within the range of the Mars orbit and down to the Venus orbit, where all these most significant kinds of things are there. Comets are a little bit different problem. So therefore we've reached the point that mankind must move from limitation on living on Earth to beginning to take over places like Mars. Now, curiosity is an example of something in that direction. Curiosity itself is not a solution to this problem, but it's a necessary step in the process of trying to deal with it. So therefore, we are now going to have to think about integrating man into the functions of the solar system, at least in the region between the Mars orbit and the Venus orbit, because that's the area we've got to solve. So all of these processes, therefore, come together in one thing. Mankind is now about to depart from the limitations on Earth habitation. Mankind is going into the moon to develop in tunnels under the moon's surface the preparations for the mass attack on the mission of Mars. Once we do that, say a generation from now, with a hyperinflation or hyper density of energy flux density, then we will be able to do that within, say, a week between Moon and Mars landing. Once that reaches, mankind will have a more personally important role, direct role, in terms of this process. But in the meantime, our job is to prepare the way for that process and do as much as we can now in trying to detect the threats to Earth, of threats to mankind on Earth, in order to stave off the worst threats we face to now. So that's the nature of our real task. We have a real task. And this tiddlywink kind of thing about we're going to fix that with this, with that scheme or other, forget it. It's nonsense. Mankind's increase of the productive powers of labor in terms of improved technology, increased energy flux density. Everything about mankind's survival means energy flux density increases. That means higher in density. Without that, no luck, no survival. So mankind has to change its policy, dump the green policy, which is presently the greatest single threat to humanity. That's a killer. And we have to understand that it is the increase of man's intelligence. We mean also scientific intelligence. The ability to create, the ability to generate higher energy flux densities per capita and per square kilometer of territory. These are the standards on which credit is generated. is to increase the population of the planet. Increase it. Stop this killing people. Increase it. Because we need more work done. We need also increases of the energy flux density of the work being done. These are absolute necessities for us. And the crap that we've been shoved into us, with all this green crap, has just got to end. We have a population of the planet we need every damn individual in this planet. We need them. They have a purpose in existing. Because they can become more productive. And as they become more productive and their children become more productive and so forth, mankind's ability to cope with these problems increases. There is no such thing as overpopulation. There's undermentation. And that's what the problem is. So these are the considerations. You have to think of not of money as something of fixed value. You walk in with this money. I got my money. This is my money. I'm going to spend it the way I want to. You don't get any of my money. That kind of thing. The Andrew Jackson kind of nonsense. Right? So the point is, we need every human being. We need them to live longer and better. We need them to become more creative. We need to have their children better educated and developed. We need an increase of the potential productivity of the human force per capita and per square kilometer. And that's are the missions that we must fulfill. There are many things we don't know yet, but these things we do know. The increase of the productivity of labor per capita with an increasing population is the absolute necessity, which has to be coupled with the fact that mankind is no longer going to be content to sit on earth and gossip about the neighbors. At this point, mankind is going to take an active role in taking over the Mars orbit. We are going to be inhabiting it with all kinds of instruments and so forth we put there. We're going to learn how to control these asteroids that threaten us. We have a very poor track on it now. We're going to learn how to use planets as communication devices in this process. These are the things that we must do. And every step we take in this matter increases the productive powers of labor, makes people smarter, makes them more capable, gives them greater incentive, makes them happier. And that's what we must do. And all these solutions, which are not solutions, they're actually threats. The green problem is not a solution to anything. It's a threat to humanity. Green people are a threat to humanity. We want pink people. Have fun.
Thank you very much. I want to begin the question and answer session with a question on the subject of the looming threat of war as regards the Syria situation and the Obama administration's accelerated drive towards the explosion of general war in this area, in this region. So I'm going to ask Dennis Mason, who, as I said before, is an editor with Lpac TV. Many of our viewers are familiar with him. I'd like to ask Dennis to come to the podium to ask a question on this subject.
So, with the Syria situation more particularly, there's been a lot of elements around the case of chemical weapons that has been hyped up in the media. You've had the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, come out and say that chemical weapons, the use of them, are going to be the red line. Obama has said this. Rasmussen of NATO also has said this, and this has been wildly propagating throughout the media. Now, at the same time, you've had reports that Syria is now arming these chemical weapons. But, you know, with the media being what it is, you've also had conflicting reports about our own carrier groups. So where I'm going with this question is what is your assessment of the Syria situation as a whole in the midst of all these different elements that are on the table? Because at the same time, right, you've had the Senate. They voted to assess a potential no-fly zone in Syria. This passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. Earlier on, you had comments from McCain saying that, well, if we were to have a no-fly zone and shoot down a few Syrian planes, then that might teach them to stay out of that area, right? So you have this real aggressive attitude stance now coming from the Senate. Now, and also one of the Patriot batteries which is scheduled for deployment into Turkey is not an anti-missile battery, but is particularly an anti-aircraft battery. Now, the Russians have been repeatedly alluding to what they've been calling Chekhov's principle, which is that if a gun is to show up in the first act, then by the third act, it'll be fired. And they've been consistently in defense of sovereignty and in defense of international law as to the situation. While President Putin was in Turkey recently, he actually signed 12 different economic agreements with Turkey, one of which was to build a nuclear plant. Now, at the same time, NATO is saying we're going to consolidate our ground forces and put them into Turkey. So you have this real collision, a real fog of war kind of manifold with the media coverage and whatnot. So the question, more directly, is what's your assessment of this? What's actually going on here?
Okay. Well, first of all, this is a big fraud. I had a discussion with our people yesterday on precisely this question, and I questioned the question: who had the actual proof of this thing? The whole thing was a fraud. McCain fell for it. Other people fell for it. They were babbling about a stupid fraud, which is a complete fraud. And this is all, in part, a diversion to try to defend the President of the United States, who's a damn liar. And also to try to take the heat off Susan Rice, or Race, or whatever you want to call her. So there is no truth to this story. But you have had a bunch of damn fools in the Senate and elsewhere of the United States and in the international press talking about something for which there is no evidence. And you got Hillary Clinton taken in by the same swindle, babbling about this nonsense, which he has no evidence of this thing. None. Besides, the other part about the thing is that the idea that Syria would do that is nonsense. Because they would never do that. Why? Because it's the most highly impractical and most dangerous thing to do. So that since the Syrians are not stupid, they wouldn't do it. But only stupid Americans and Brits and other people are crazy enough to believe what is nothing but a rumor which has no confirmation ever uttered by anyone known to us. So the thing is a complete fraud, but it's typical of the kind of government we have now. And the greatest danger, as that demonstrates to the American people, is their own government.
Thanks for setting the record straight on that. So I got a question for you on economics. At the present time, you got this discussion of the fiscal cliff. Today, top members, I shouldn't say they're top, they're in leading positions. Democratic members of Congress are discussing the introduction of needs testing for Medicare recipients. This is reminiscent of the conditions right now in Germany under Hartz-IV, where to receive government aid, you have to demonstrate that you're in a state of absolute penury, basically, to get anything. At the same time, there was an interview published on the website this morning between Natalie Lovgren and EIR's Paul Gallagher about the status of the bailouts and the Fed. And Paul went through some interesting figures that currently the Federal Reserve is putting about $40 billion a month into circulation indirectly through the purchasing of treasuries from banks. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has put out $2.5 trillion basically in this manner. But the people are saying it's not inflationary because it's never getting out of the banking sector. That is, since banks aren't actually giving loans, which everybody knows, it's not causing any inflation, and that's why we're living through such a non-inflationary period. So here's my question to you. The Federal Open Market Committee is going to be meeting in the next week, timing with the planned departure of the Congress, and it's expected that Bernanke is going to introduce quantitative easing 4. the sequel no one wants to see. This would involve the Fed purchasing $85 billion a month of treasuries, with the plan of purchasing 90% of all treasuries offered in the year 2013. What is Bernanke up to? What's he thinking? And what would be the consequences if this is the policy we adopt?
Well, you've got people who are really degenerates, and Bernanke is a degenerate. There's no question of it. No one with his access to knowledge of what his could believe anything except that he's pushing the United States over the cliff into a hyperinflation which makes Germany in 1923 look like an easy target. This thing is a complete fraud. But what do they think they're doing then? Now what they're doing is they're creating the kind of hyperinflation which will blow out the whole thing. There's nothing different in terms of method with what happened in Germany in 1923, especially in the autumn of 1923, and what is proposed on a much larger scale globally as well as in the United States. So this thing is complete insanity, and the obvious intention is what? Population reduction. This is the Queen's thing. To reduce the population of the human species throughout the planet. When the Queen says that the baseline tolerable population level is slightly over 1 billion people in a world that has 7 billion people right now. And if you look at the trends in terms of the policy of this president on health care and everything else, you're talking about genocide. No different than what Hitler did. And even at the beginning of Obama's administration, one of the first things he pushed was that, exactly Hitler's first stage level of genocide. And later you got the bigger shot. And we're getting now the threat of the bigger shot. We're getting to the Hitler's full program of genocide, of population reduction. But the British Empire and similar kinds of institutions in the past have done that repeatedly, reducing the population. It happened to the Roman Empire. They did it deliberately to themselves. It's happened repeatedly. It happened after Charlemagne's death. There was a general, and the Crusade period was actually genocide. What happened in the proceedings in the century before? Genocide, deliberate, and this has always been a part of the what's called the oligarchical system. The idea that human beings, most human beings, are nothing but cattle, and when they become too numerous, then you cut them down, and that has happened repeatedly. We are now in a period where the policies of the President of the United States, as expressed out of his own back pocket, are exactly that, a program of genocide. His health care policies are actually a genocide program. The lack of employment of people who are perfectly employable, the same thing. So we're living in the edge of hell. And this double talk, this green stuff, this stinking green stuff, which you don't want in your neighborhood. And that's what the problem is. It's a fraud. We can meet. Look, what's happening in China. They're not a perfect program, but there was a reversal of the destruction of the Chinese population and the threats to it, and standard of living, which existed earlier. What's happening with India? India's trying to fight this thing off. What's happening throughout Asia? What's happening is genocide. Throughout this whole region is population reduction. And where does it come from? It comes from the Queen of England. She said it did. She spoke it. She pushed it. She demanded it. All her admirers are pushing it. And what it is a reduction of the population. You're going to look at the next program coming out of Obama for the next term. Genocide. And people are just giving in to this crap because they no longer have personal dignity. They put up with things that no person with a sense of personal dignity would tolerate. They say, what can we do about it? Throw the bum out of office.
Okay. Well, I have a question about the continuing legacy of the Andrew Jackson operation as we're seeing it today. And I'd like to start by reading part of a document by Bill Roberts, who's the former candidate for Congress in Michigan, which you can find this on the site. It's going to be the authoritative press release for the Jackson report, which Michael Kirsch put together. I'm going to read just a few sections of this. Bill writes, he says, Andrew Jackson, who has been falsely revered by many Americans as a great man of the people, has now been exposed as having been the most thoroughly and efficiently evil president in U.S. history. The crimes of that administration, as a treason project, lie at the foundation of every great social, economic, and political problem our nation now faces. And I'm skip down a little bit. He writes, for those who are outraged by big government and believe government should be no more than a protector of your basic liberties, this report is also a must-read. You will find out that you are part of your own problem. In 1833, when Jackson destroyed the National Bank, which he said was an instrument of the elites, his intention was to make government a simple machine in service of a small portion of the population who owned slaves, ran the banking houses of New York, and opposed the broader economic development of the nation. Aside from a few exceptional presidents, the intention of Jackson's backers has been more or less realized. And then the concluding section I want to read from this. He says, the shocking implication of this report is that the United States has not functioned as a sovereign nation since 1833. In fact, both the Democratic and Republican parties now function on the basis of a fraud that was originally considered an act of treason by the average working American. This is why, in essence, there is no programmatic alternative to the three-point economic solution proposed by Mr. LaRouche to reestablish the principle of credit in economic policymaking. Only by waging a fight to free the policymaking process from the party system of Jackson can there be a future for the United States. No popular party-based approach will work. Only a fight by self-selected individual patriots to restore a programmatic commitment to the general welfare in opposition to this rotten party system will succeed. So with this continuing living legacy of the Jackson disease today, there's a couple examples that you can take from Congress. Two of our federal representatives were taken to the woodshed by the respective parties. You had Walter Jones, who was pulled from the Financial Services Committee, and Marcy Kaptur being denied the position on the Appropriations Committee, which she was very qualified for. Now, these representatives, Jones in the Republican Party, Kaptur in the Democratic Party, are both champions of reinstating Glass-Steagall. So you have an example of congressional leaders who fell prey to the Jackson disease, irrespective of party, for not falling in line, lockstep with the party machine. And you have countless expressions of the continuing Jackson legacy with the Obama presidency, with the unitary executive, and this kind of thing. So in your newest paper, which is called Glass-Steagall or Die, which is, there's a pre-publication version of it available on the site right now, you point to this continuity of British agents in the White House from Aaron Burr all the way up through today. We have Tony Blair. You've had this constant British presence within the executive branch. So what I'd like you to speak to this in light of our organizing with this new report.
Okay. Well, first of all, the whole thing is a fraud, as you might expect. And knowing the people who are doing it, you even more than suspect, naturally. No, it's not the penetration of the United States by some British agents. That's not the issue. The point is the United States is controlled by the British monarchy through these instruments. Look, that's the point. It's not some mysterious thing hiding under the couch. This is running it from the top. What's Obama? What is Obama? Well, the Queen created him out of nothing. Huh? We're not even sure he's an American. I mean, that question has never been settled. Not satisfactorily. All right, so who brought him in? Tony Blair, the man who created the war in Iraq, which is just recently shut down, which made a mess of the whole territory, and the whole thing was a fraud and a lie. And Tony Blair is one of the favorite honchos of the Queen. Now, if you go back to the original case of what happened with this kind of stuff, that the whole operation, the Jackson operation, was run by whom? It was run by the the King of England, the British Queen, the British monarchy. The British monarchy ran the whole operation. What they did is they based it largely on New York City area and some in Boston on a lesser degree. And these people set up a banking system. And what did they do? The first thing they did is bankrupted the United States. And that's what they did. By destroying the credit of the United States and liquidating it under the pressure of British agents, of which Jackson was one. Jackson was a whore, a male or female or whatever he is. He's a whore. And at the time that he entered the presidency, he was not in his best mental condition. He was just an old grouch, making loud noises, making threats, doing nothing systemically. But he had a bunch of advisors who were really sharpies, who were working for the British monarchy's institutions. So what happened is an operation was run to get rid of the U.S. independence of the British Empire. From the time of Jackson until Lincoln, who was then murdered because he was against the British, and it was the British who set him up for the assassination. So then you had more problems along the way. You look at some of the assassinations that occurred of presidents in that period and during the 20th century. You look at the corruption which has taken over the United States through these financial institutions. The American people are a bunch of dupes. They've been duped to believe that the people who are actually agents of the monarchy are somehow independent factors, American factors. Wall Street is one big cesspool of British interest. And Boston, too. Boston's got the same disease, and they got them earlier. So the point is, this is not a problem of some sneaky guy coming in and somehow corrupting the show. The point is, the problem has been when you see a nation like the United States, of the power the United States is represented at various points in its history. You say the United States is capitulating to this little silly queen sitting on top of or something or other? No, it's not. The British Empire is an empire. They control all of Africa. They run all the murder in Africa. They run the terror, the drug terror in East Asia or West Asia. They run the international drug trafficking. It's all there. So the point is, we've got to cancel the British Empire. And it's not too hard to do so. I could know how to do it. Put the job in my hands, I'll get it done. I know exactly what to do. Because I understand the monetary financial systems. It's very simple. We can do to them what the British did to us in the Jackson administration. We can do the same damn thing. If we declare their money worthless, there's nothing they can do about it. But we have to have the guts to do it.
I'm sure that's a job that you're not only competent to do, but would do with great relish. Let me take the chance, I believe this is going to be the last question tonight, to Thank you for this really beautiful job of interweaving so many aspects that confront us politically and economically. I'd love to ask you about greenism and space, but I've got another question for you on economics. To follow up on what I had asked you last week about the members of Congress who were discussing infrastructure and the question of money being cheap and how to finance it and whether Glass-Steagall was required, as though there's an independent monetary policy. Here's what I'd like to bring up. First off, let me read an excerpt, which is almost the entirety of one of Abe Lincoln's campaign speeches in 1932 for state legislature. He said, "My policies are short and sweet, like the old woman's dance. I am in favor of a national bank. I am in favor of the internal improvement system and a high protective tariff." Now, what some of these congressmen seem not to have understood, despite their laudable intentions, was how connected these different aspects are. So I'd like to ask you to address once again, how is it that Glass-Steagall, the national credit system, and specific physical infrastructure projects, how is it that these are all really one policy?
Well, it's a human policy, and the human policies mean that we rely upon a sharing of certain cultural facilities of communication and so forth in society, on family connections and extended family connections and these sorts of things, and the use of language, the role of language. And language is a very precious thing to human beings. I don't know how it works with monkeys, but it doesn't seem to work out too well there either. But the point is that we have a cultural format. It's not just language. It's a cultural format in general, which is developed by people, passed from one generation to another. Now, the principles are not essentially, by any necessity, at odds. It's simply that when the development of the child's mind from birth depends upon the cultural setting in which they're raised. And this goes for many generations. I mean, I'm not yet a century old, but I'm moving in that direction if allowed to live. So therefore, the idea is you can solve this problem by simply developing better relations, systemic relations among nations and national cultures. And what you have to do is find a middle ground which allows them to bridge whatever the differences are, cultural differences are between. And you'll find that the most essential things in terms of day-to-day life among nations are pretty much the same. And they should be pretty much the same. Because if you have a state of general trade and production, in terms of technology, which you should have for any nation, the very fact that you're sharing a common technology causes you to bring yourselves together among different nations, because the technology is being shared. And when the technology is being shared, you work backwards from the agreement on technology down to the birth and development of the child. So therefore you still have the child, you still have the language culture, the thing which define a different nation with its own culture. But what you have when it comes to international trade and international relations on a large scale, you need an integration in terms of cooperation. And so therefore that's the remedy. But there's no need for any of this other nonsense as such. What they need, for example, if I get two people going to Mars to colonize Mars, or three people from different nations, how do they work together? They work together of necessity. And that's what happens at the human necessity, because of the creative powers specific to the human mind. No other species has that power, because we have this creative potential. And to the extent we realize that potential, that we push ahead in terms of common advances, the common advances bring the nations of mankind closer and closer together. Because if you go to the highest level of technology, and you bring people into the highest level of technology existing or coming into existence, then these nations are brought together by the fact that they require a foundation from which to base these steps of progress. So therefore mankind maintains its language culture the peculiarities of its ancestry, and so forth. And they converse with each other on all levels. But at the same time, nations which are different nations cooperate on the basis of more advanced technologies as the common denominator. And that doesn't involve any problems. For example, the idea of, you take the European organization, particularly the landed one. Now they created the Euro system, which is really flushing the toilet the wrong way. Because the culture of each of these nations, while generally congruent in terms of their essential features, the language culture is different, and other things are still different. The associations are different, family ties, family histories, all these things. So we find that the Euro system is a failure. It's a terrible failure. But it was intended to become one. The British intended that that should happen to it. And guess who did this? Tony Blair. The greatest whore on the planet today. This whore. And they essentially created a reversal of the history of culture of mankind. That's what he represents. And so that what they did is they created this system, the Euro system. It's totally bankrupt. It's disintegrating. Greece is a case of mass murder imposed upon it. Spain is going in the same direction. Portugal, and so forth, and so on. This is what is happening. These nations are about to disintegrate. They need to get their sovereignty back. And they can cooperate on the basis of their sovereignty. What they're having is a humiliation where the British are actually running the whole operation. And they introduced this Euro system. The first step was, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and then Germany decided to reunify, Helmut Kohl. He took measures toward that, and you had a French whore, well, I guess that they've specialized in that sometimes, but a French whore who threatened Germany with war, a socialist president, by the way, and really a tool of the British monarchy, as I happen to know personally, Mitterrand. Mitterrand was a personal tool of the British monarchy. And he, implicitly, threatened Germany and Kohl with war if they tried to reunify Germany. The condition was that the Euro system be come into existence, which destroys the actual efficient sovereignty of these nations of Europe. These nations are now in the process of being destructed by that system. No? This is evil. This is pure evil. What's being done to the Greek population alone is sheer mass murder. And anyone involved in forcing the Greeks to submit to that is a mass murderer. This is not a relationship among nations. The destruction of nations is the destruction of mankind.
Well, I thank you very much for what you've said here tonight. I would like to thank Jason and Dennis for joining us. This brings a conclusion to our webcast. Before we end, I want to strongly encourage everybody watching to read the How Andrew Jackson Destroyed the United States document by Michael Kirsch. Study it, circulate it. This is the most critical element of our intervention over the coming week. And it's available right on the front page of LaRouchePAC.com. So thank you for watching. Please contribute to the LaRouche Political Action Committee, and be sure to tune in again next week. Good night.